Another line of trenches and bunkers was creeping across from the southeast. The NVA plan was for the infantry to mass under cover of the trenches before launching their final assault. By the last week of February 1968, few Americans inside Khe Sanh doubted that the big North Vietnamese ground assault would have to come soon. The moon was in its darkest phase, and a night infantry attack would have a good chance of overwhelming the perimeter defenses. Smashing the enemy trench lines was an absolute priority. The Americans tried every conceivable method to destroy the trenches. Napalm and bombs were rained down in huge quantities. The Marines fired countless artillery barrages. But the Americans had little success. The discouraging fact, learned from other wars, was that it could take 1,000 hits to destroy 100 yards of trenches. In the end, the answer lay with the B-52s. Up to now, arc-light raids had been kept more than 2 miles away from the base perimeter. On February 27, 1968, the restriction was lifted. For the first time, the B-52s, under close radar guidance, dropped their bombs to within 1,200 yards of the Khe Sanh base. The effect was shattering. There was massive damage to the North Vietnamese trenches and bunkers. It was a turning point in the battle for Khe Sanh. From now on, close-in bombing by B-52s would play a major part in the defense. The sudden increase in North Vietnamese activity around Khe Sanh had left no one in any doubt that the climax of the battle was near. A few days before, a Marine patrol trying to get information had been almost wiped out. North Vietnamese traffic along Route 9 from Laos had also risen to a new peak. Enormous quantities of supplies were being rushed to the Khe Sanh divisions for the final assault. The 66th Regiment of the North Vietnamese 304th Division was assembling near a plantation to the south of the Khe Sanh base. Units were also massing near an old French fort. On the night of February 29th, a battalion of the 304th NVA Division assaulted the 37th Arvin Rangers at the eastern edge of the camp, a diversion to cover the unexpected and imminent withdrawal of all NLF troops from Khe Sanh. The American defense was to coordinate strikes by artillery, fighter bombers, and B-52s on 3 main areas through which the attacking NVA had to pass. Then, as the final assault waves approached the base, Khe Sanh's own defensive fire plan was unleashed. The base perimeter at the point of attack was manned by the 37th South Vietnamese Ranger Battalion. As the lead NVA units advanced, the base fired an artillery pattern forming the sides of an open box. A creeping barrage was then walked up and down inside. At the same time, 2 NVA battalions, cut off behind the box, were hit by fighter bomber strikes. While long-range artillery from the Rockpile and Camp Carroll created a moving outer cordon. The North Vietnamese troops, who survived to emerge from the open end of the box, then faced the direct fire of the South Vietnamese Rangers. Over the next week, despite continued aerial bombardment and the barrage of artillery fire, the trenches came even closer. Then, for no apparent reason, they stopped. On March 6th, with the Marines still waiting for the final assault, many of Jap's troops stumbled away through what was left of the jungle, an area of land that had received 100,000 tons of bombs, the heaviest aerial bombardment on a single piece of land in the history of warfare. The next 3 weeks were relatively quiet around Khe Sanh. American air activity increased steadily as the weather improved, and more NVA units began to withdraw into Laos. But the battle for Khe Sanh was not yet over. On March 22, 1968, there was a sudden explosion of violence. Without warning, a massive North Vietnamese bombardment, including huge numbers of heavy shells from the Ko Rock Mountain, slammed into Khe Sanh. More than 1,000 rounds hit the base at the rate of 100 every hour. At the same time, the electronic sensors around Khe Sanh again indicated NVA movements, and the Americans replied with heavy bombing. As the weather steadily improved, U.S. air attacks around the Khe Sanh base grew fiercer by the day. Further afield, over the North Vietnamese rear areas, fighter bombers roamed with orders to pounce on any movement. For the North Vietnamese, the situation could only get worse. General Giap was forced to concede that Khe Sanh could not now be taken. By this time, the Marines were mounting small but aggressive attacks out of the base. General Giap now ordered the remainder of his units to pull back from Khe Sanh. One by one, the NVA regiments around the base melted away. Only 6,000 troops were left behind to continue the siege of the Marine combat base. Although fighting would go on, the worst of Khe Sanh's ordeal was over. On April 1st, 1968, the Americans formally ended Operation Scotland, the defense of Khe Sanh, and 7 days later began Operation Pegasus. April 9th was the first time in 45 days that no shells fell on Khe Sanh. The aim of Pegasus was to reopen Route 9, the road linking Khe Sanh to the other American bases along the demilitarized zone.